And I'm going to welcome everybody to this wonderful part of our summer camp for nonprofits. We're focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion today. And I want to thank Nicole Jean again for being here, and let her take it away because it's an important topic.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and good to see you. Good morning, Donna. We are a small group, but some things happen for a reason. We're recording it, which is great. Elizabeth will be able to share it with folks. I do think folks are probably going to join as we're talking, but I have a very short presentation, and then Donna, we can go right into some Q&A and discussion. Elizabeth will share the presentation with you and the attendees. So you will get a copy of this. Don't worry about taking feverish notes. This is the third installment to a 4-part series entitled Summer Camp for Nonprofits, because we said everyone else gets a camp. Why don't we? And now that school is officially in session, we're back to school. Next week will be our Coffee and Connect. So next Tuesday, we'll focus primarily on what you can do next with all the information that we've learned about fundraising, grant writing, and now diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as you know, this idea was birthed during the pandemic. If you're not sure, Elizabeth and I met and we had this wonderful series all developed, and then the pandemic hit and everything shut down in early 2020. And we shifted the program modules to virtual, and it worked out really well. And we've continued this process since then. So we're very excited. I want to thank the Middle Country Public Library, the Miller Business Center, for this opportunity, and the illustrious director, Elizabeth Malafi, for being so progressive and forward thinking in planning ahead when it comes to equipping and supporting our nonprofits. Next slide. So just a little bit about me. I have over 20 years of experience, multidisciplinary background spanning academia, business ownership. I owned my own company for over a decade as a grant writer and administrator, and I've worked at every level of government, state, federal, town, county, and village. And I was responsible mainly in my career for writing and managing grants and facilitating management and leadership training. So in the spring of this year, I completed my certification as a DEI professional, and I completed some very comprehensive training that included facilitation, development, activity, and strategic planning. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what do you do about DEI in your nonprofit? Next slide. So Donna, since it's just us, you don't have to do a chat drop, but I was going to go over the agenda and then ask folks a few questions, but we can just chat it up. But the agenda is for today, what is DEI specifically? How do you start? What can you do? And I'm recommending that you start with allyship. And then I'll share some really fun success stories with you, and then some steps you can take home today. Next slide. So just share with me if you're comfortable. Is your DEI strategy underway or under consideration? Are you working on a strategy now or only thinking about it?
Thinking.
All right. So under consideration, that's a good thing. So we've got someone under consideration. And Elizabeth, is your organization, does it have a DEI strategy underway or under consideration?
No, underway for sure.
Wonderful. So we have a UW.
At the beginning stages, but underway.
Underway. Good. At the beginning stages. Nice. So we have an underway and an under consideration. That's really, really good. So this is culture work. DEI is very simply culture work. This is a field that has a different name, but it is a topic that we are familiar with. And this is organizational culture work. And I want you to feel comfortable understanding that. So DEI is a natural evolution of organizational culture and organizational culture work. Next slide. So what exactly is DEI? So when we say DEI, what exactly is it? Again, it's a newer term that is a reframing of the work that we have done and continue to do as we expand, perceptions and relationships and connection at work with different people. So let's center on language. So what does DEI stand for, and why is it important for us to know what that is? So DEI is many elements. Again, and we're going to look at the later on while we're talking, we're going to talk about what each of these means. So you can go to the next slide. What does D, what does E, what does I mean? So DEI is many elements, many elements of human and organizational behavior. DEI touches on every element of your organization, including people and how they work together, the perception of fairness and transparency, particularly when we talk about promotions and moving up. DEI strategy also touches on the dynamics of privilege and power, and how staff and people outside of your organization perceive you, and how they perceive accessibility to your programs. Next slide. So DEI specifically, or DEIB, which is belonging, is a set of policies, practices, and initiatives intended to create a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. That is what we mean when we say DEI or DEIB. And the belonging is really, inclusion is about whether people feel included or considered, and B, belonging is whether they feel welcome. So I intentionally making sure that folks are included, but belonging is how comfortable do they feel? Do they feel welcomed? Next slide. So let's look at the specific descriptions of each. Diversity is the variety of differences that we see in our workplace, and that is many dimensions. So that's what we call dimensions of diversity. This is some of the language that I'm sharing with you so you feel comfortable talking about this. So we don't say demographics, we say dimensions of diversity. That's variety of difference in gender, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and any other characteristic. That's what diversity means. Equity is fairness in access. So fairness in accessing resources and opportunities within your organization and public facing as well. So equity in the workplace ensures that there's a level playing field for all people. I know you may have seen that graphic that has 3 people standing looking over a fence at a baseball game. One person is smaller in stature, then their next person is higher, and then the last person is higher than that. So there's 3 levels of folks trying to look over this fence to the baseball game. And equity is giving everyone the same size or same height box to stand on. Where where justice is where each person gets a box that is tailored to make sure that everyone's the same height. So equity is really about fairness in access, everyone having the same opportunity to engage or connect to resources. So diversity is often described as a mosaic. Each person has their own identity that becomes an integral part of the work. Equity is often compared to finding different size stools or tools so that everyone is seated or standing at the same height. So that's what equity is. Equity is tailoring the approach so that folks can have the same access. Inclusion, just scroll down just a little bit, the concept of ensuring individuals of marginalized backgrounds are invited, listened to, and welcomed at an organization. So we want to make sure that we're creating a space where people, particularly with marginalized or historically marginalized experiences, feel listened to, invited, and welcome to the organization. And creating employee resource groups is a really good way to do this, or having like a cross interdisciplinary staff team. A DEI working group is what I call it, and they're responsible for informing the development of programs, events, etc. Next slide, please. So remember, we show up at work with an intersection of identity. This diversity wheel was created by Gardensworth and Rowe way back in the early 2000s, and it shows us the human experience of how we develop our perception and where diversity really comes from. So it starts with our personality, which according to most scientific literature, your personality is set pretty much by the age of 7. Your primary dimensions are those dimensions or characteristics that, for the most part, you have very little control over, meaning, your age, your gender, physical ability, race, ethnicity, orientation. These are things that are somewhat innate and not as changeable as others. Your secondary dimension has a lot to do with where you are in society and the level of social status you've attained. And that includes education, marriage, recreational habits, and income. So our personality informs or is a direct result of our primary dimension, those unchangeable characteristics. And the more we know about that and how other folks in our organization, their intersectionality of identity, it gives us a greater sense of appreciation and sensitivity to diversity. And then finally, organizational dimension. These are the areas that we have total control over for the most part. What job we take, positions that we aspire to, what our management status is, whether or not we're a part of a union. These dimensions are so important because these are the roles we play at work. This is how we show up at work, but look at what's underneath how we show up. Look at the layers of what's underneath our official role. These dimensions are so important because they help us understand how we approach DEI strategy and DEI work in our organizations and culture. So I use this diversity wheel in team exercises about intersectionality. So if you have an opportunity to throw this up on the board and just start a discussion and say, let's talk about the different dimensions of diversity. Can anyone name a few? Pick a few and everyone talk about what that means and how they think it influences perception at work. Next slide. So to put it simply for us, in the public and nonprofit sector, DEI starts with a shared understanding about what diversity, equity, and inclusion means and connecting it to our culture. That's it. It's centering on what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean, and then how do we connect it to our culture at work? Next slide. So how do we build shared understanding? So when we talk about DEI being a function of culture, language, meaning, and behavior. So when we talk about how DEI can simply be put, I had those 2 boxes before. DEI was at the top and what was underneath was shared understanding and culture. So how do we build shared understanding? We start with the language that we use. So terms and vocabulary is how we connect to meaning. So what I recommend that folks do is you have a voluntary group that wants to learn more about DEI and have them share and discuss common terms. So you could give a glossary or have games around it. I have a game I made up called Deja Bingo. That's diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility. And we play, if you can guess the definition, which acronym it is, what I read the definition for diversity and whoever gets a D circles it and on and on and on. But you can find interesting ways to share with folks what DEI means. So vocabulary and terminology is really, really good. What do we mean when we say diversity in this organization? What do we mean by equity? What do we mean by inclusion, justice, accessibility? We start with language and meaning first because that equips us so that we feel comfortable talking about these things in a safe and accurate way. DEI, as I tell most people, it will trigger some visceral responses. It is emotional because this is all about our perception and how we've historically treated one another and how we treat each other at work. So there is an emotional element, but I always say that DEI is heart work. It is heart work and it's a sacred act. That's what I always tell everyone. So don't feel put upon that if you make a mistake, you're a bad person. This is evolutionary. We're learning as we grow. So the language and the themes and vocabulary and concepts, understanding them and having a handle on them will make you feel more comfortable. So I say start very basic with that. And then once we have the language and shared meaning, then we can begin to look at how we can change our own individual behavior, which is why many organizations start with training on implicit bias and microaggression, since those are the two intimate areas of our perception that influences our behavior, and in turn influences our culture. So many organizations, they conduct implicit bias or microaggression trainings because it's a very quick and well-known way to get people thinking about their perception, because perception is where our behavior comes from, and our collective behavior influences the culture. So I would share with you, don't necessarily look at getting a big group of people together and coming up with a big mission statement and a vision statement. I say get people together, put some coffee and some fruit in the room and start talking. That's my recommendation. I have shepherded 3 or 4 of these organizational groups already. And the most effective is when we started talking right off the bat. Next slide. Oh, go back one more time, excuse me. So individual behavior is what creates the experience that we have in our culture at work. Thank you, Elizabeth. So yes, I wanted to conclude on that the behavior and culture are reciprocal. They go back and forth, but it all starts with language and meaning. Thank you. Yes, please advance. Thank you so much. DEI is holistic. It's all about understanding each other, celebrating and acknowledging our differences, and the reality of navigating our organizations in very different times. The world is very different now. The fastest growing quote unquote minority population are the Latino Latinx population. And we are now at a place in the United States where we're having discussions about slavery, whether people are comfortable or not. The point is this discussion is being brought up, as well as reparations. So these are very emotionally charged topics, and DEI touches on all of that. So understand that the right way is just doing it in a way that is sensitive and is inclusive. So the more inclusive you are, the better chance you have in getting it right. So it's about understanding our differences. It's about acknowledging the reality of how we navigate society. And I love the iceberg image. If you look here, this is just some images from marketing material I've done. So Juneteenth in June, which was nice. And then Pride, of course, on the left. Everyone is welcome, accepted, celebrated, encouraged, respected, and loved here. I love that. I love that marketing material for Pride. And then the two folks sharing ideas together. And the iceberg image is so powerful because we know that what people show us on the surface is just the beginning, that what is beneath it is what drives the behavior. And that's so tremendous, right? The intersectionality and how people, what drives them, what informs their perception is, what we see at work really is just literally the tip of the iceberg, quite frankly. Next slide, please. So DEI strategy success rests on commitment from the top, shared understanding and commitment. So we talked about understanding, shared meaning, understanding and commitment. The only way it works is when these two are connected, when shared understanding is coupled with commitment, because it is an ongoing process. DEI will always be necessary, just like organizational culture and organizational behavior and human resources is absolutely necessary. We can never do away with the HR or the finance department. DEI is the same. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is our new way of doing some of this more challenging or different hard work as it relates to connecting to one another. So I'm going to take a quick break, 2 minutes, and ask Donna, before I share with you ways to be an ally and some take home, I want to ask Donna, is there anything specific you want to talk about or ask now?
I'm still listening.
Okay, that's good. I just wanted to make sure. That is good. That is good. So how can you start? Next slide, please. I am so glad you asked. So how can you start your DEI journey? Allyship, to me, is one of the best first steps. This is actively supporting people of marginalized identities against acts of oppression, even if you're not part of the group itself. So next slide. Very, very dynamic lady. Her name was Melinda Epler, and she is the author of a book, How to Be an Ally. And she encapsulated in an excellent TED Talk. I would say look her up. Her name is Melinda Epler, and she's like my allyship whisperer. She encapsulated it in 8 very simple steps that you could start right now today. First is do no harm. That is recognizing implicit bias within yourself and then stopping it and recognizing it in other people and helping and encouraging them to not do it. So one of the examples she gave is if you're invited to be on a panel or to be a speaker at an event, you can ask them, what is the diversity dimensions of the panel? Women, men, different gendered identity, race, ethnicity, and then advocate for diversifying that panel. I thought it was an excellent idea. So her point is do no harm, to just right at the start, ask yourself, what can I do? Then second, give me your full attention. When you are listening to someone, and I've had to practice this, turn away from the laptop, put your eyes strictly on the person and listen attentively. Even if you have to take notes, questions, if you have to write your questions down, which leads to the third point is don't interrupt. And one of the things Melinda Epler talks about is that people with historically marginalized experiences, like women, people of certain ethnicities or sexual orientations, they are interrupted 7 times more than white males, 7 times more. And this is a practice I'm putting in place now when I am speaking with someone, even if they, particularly if they're advancing staff, I'll take notes. I will write my questions out before I speak. So that's something to think about, is don't interrupt. Echo and attribute. Melinda Epler says when you hear a good idea and you use it later, echo it and attribute it to the person that said it, particularly if they are from a community that has been historically marginalized or disadvantaged. Elizabeth, I see you turned on your camera. Did you need me to stop? Oh, it's muted. You're okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. I just I'm shaking my head so much. I'm like, I have to be back on camera.
No problem. No problem. So her fourth recommendation on how to be a better ally is to echo and attribute. I have been in that situation in my career where I come up with an idea, no one listens to me, and then 20 minutes later, usually someone of a privileged class or a person that it historically has had power or title will basically verbatim share my idea, and then they get credit. So one of the ways we can be a better ally is by echoing and attributing good ideas to where they come from. Learn the language I use to describe myself. So listen intently, build relationship with me, and ask the question, how do I pronounce my name? What are my preferred pronouns? I have a very good colleague right now that was she and they. Now she's all pronouns welcome. And she's asked me to make sure that I say that I say her name, like say her name was Jennifer. Jennifer, all pronouns welcome, so that people know when I introduce her that all pronouns are welcome now. Even to the point of acknowledging when or if something happens in that person's cultural space, like the Tops Buffalo massacre. I know that it was uncomfortable at work. And one of the things that we did in our workspace, a lot of folks, from the DEI group came up to me and said, you know, my heart is with the African American community about what just happened. There was a hate crime committed against a Jewish family right here on Long Island. I knew people connected to him. I sent an email, I called, I said, listen, my heart and my spirit and energy is with you during this time of pain, because there was this hate crime, this act that was done to a Jewish family. So think about those things. Listen, learn, and normalize. So everything we're talking about, make it normal. You know, call people out when it's appropriate, like with the interrupting. I have said to colleagues, you know, let her finish or let him finish. Let's hold our questions until they're done. Or if there's an idea that I have, I say, you know, I want to thank this contribution to this idea from Elizabeth Malafi. We were in a meeting last week. I'm adding to what she already shared. It's very simple to just make it normal. And now people around me are doing it very easily. Oh, I want to thank so-and-so, the intern from last semester, for helping us with this.
So, sorry, I think I accidentally muted you, Nicole. Okay.
I got it back. That was I was like, my battery died, but I'm fully charged. Yes. So one of the things that someone said is, oh, I want to thank this, you know, we had a student intern from the semester before, and I said, I'd like to see at the bottom of the slide deck that the chief architect was this person. So now whenever that PowerPoint slide deck is run, this presenter actually says, we want to thank our spring 23 intern, Elizabeth Malafi, Nicole Jean Christian, for the architecture of this slide deck. And then advocate for small ways for people in different experiences from you. And Melinda Epler, she recommends that you be a partner with someone for their whole life, their whole career. You know, volunteering is nice, but what people really need is a relationship. I attribute most, if not all, of my professional attainment to the fact that I have a white male and a Jewish American woman who took me under their wing 20 years ago. They are both very high level executives, and they have been with me every step of my personal and professional career. They have advised me. I meet with them regularly. They have invited me places. When I was the deputy commissioner in the town of Brookhaven, Ray Donnelly, who was the commissioner at that time, he told the scheduler, when you schedule me for a meeting, there needs to be a seat at the table for Nicole Jean. I don't want her to just be an add-on. She's not going to come and sit around in the back. She needs a seat at the table. And he did that for a year. And it really helped me literally learn and grow into my profession. So being a partner in someone's life for the whole term of their career, particularly someone of a marginalized or historically disadvantaged experience, is tremendous. It is tremendous. Volunteerism is great, but mentorship is so much more effective long-term. Next slide. So that's a very quick call to action, change someone's life, their whole career. Oh yeah, that was what I was talking about. So being a part of, so number 7, let me go back real quick. Number 7 is advocating for underrepresented groups in small ways by identifying things that are happening in your community already and joining in when you can as a supporter. Number 8 is about being there for their whole career, connecting with someone and being their mentor, advocate, confidant, and friend for the life of their career. Changes things tremendously. Melinda Epler, How to Be an Ally, actions you can take for a stronger, happier workplace. Fantastic. Next slide. Implement and start today. So here's just a few things you can do. Center on language, develop a baseline of DESIA terms that you share with staff and talk about what they mean. 2, provide a safe space, in-person, hybrid, or virtual, to talk and share regularly. So in a post-pandemic world, you know, we have to be intentional about supporting connection so that folks can actually learn together. We're so used to being on the screen. We have to be intentional about in-person activities. So that's something to think about.
So we watch that.
That's something to think about, is providing a safe space that is regular, that people can meet regularly to share. Develop and or activate a voluntary working group. I think this is great. Put the call out. Interdisciplinary DEI-JA group in the works. Come out. We want to get your opinions, your ideas, your impressions. Share with us as we learn together. You would be surprised at how many people will show up just because they want to learn. They want to learn more about this term. So develop an action plan and some really fun training modules. The Center for Racial Justice, and there is a Center for Racial Equity, fantastic training modules for free that you can download and tailor for your organization. Miller Business Center can provide you access to these online modules. So don't forget that. You want to integrate allyship at a staff level by, making sure you're encouraging mentorship and you're advancing staff through the ranks. We don't use the term entry level. No one's entry level, right? That denotes that someone is above and below. What we want we want to use the term advancing staff. These are folks that are moving upward in their career. Like most of us, we all are moving upward. So at every different stage, we are advancing. So we want to make sure we encourage mentorship and some level of development that's targeted for advancing staff. So let me share, next slide, some success stories. Working in my organization and in organizations in the community, had a manager make the commitment to inclusive leadership and started a very informal mentorship program, a DEI-JA, because this person told me that the managers weren't really sure a lot of times what it meant. So they wanted to mentor each other in the terminology and concepts. And they meet once a month over coffee. I go in, we talk. It's very informal. It's management only. This is their leadership group because they wanted to be able to talk freely and safely about things that they'd like to know. And then I have a science educator colleague who is actively diversifying the themes and the approaches to engagement in climate change. So this was a heavy science field that didn't have a lot of dimensions of diversity as far as gender, ethnicity, race, or age. And now this science educator colleague of mine is introducing little bits about DEI into these regional discussions about climate change, and the traction and participation has skyrocketed. Then there's an executive that I am close to that is supporting inclusive language in all written communication. So they are going through a review of all their marketing materials to make sure that all the language is inclusive. These are just small celebrations, just over a 1 to 2 year period of people that I know. Just things to think about and celebrate. Next slide, please. The bottom line is, diversity means folks are different, that they feel welcome, and that they all, and that all of these elements raise morale, productivity, and satisfaction. All the things that we do in the DEI space raises morale and satisfaction. Next slide. Some topics to think about while you're navigating this DEI landscape and journeying and co-laboring together. There are some learning opportunities here about intersectionality. How do we show up? How are our experiences informed by our perception? So the various identities that we have that we show up to work with. Justice, how do we correct and right size our systems and processes and institutions and do it in a way that everyone, or ensures that everyone, has fair and transparent access to our programs? Think about neurodiversity. I'm learning a lot about this now too. This is creating a welcoming space for all of us that learn differently. Neurodiversity is really about creating an environment where you have different ways to connect to how people learn. Some people are visual. Some people are tactile. They've got to touch it, feel it. Some people are audio motor. They have to hear it and do it. So understanding how all that works, you could maybe do some events that take on different approaches to how people learn. Inclusive leadership, really encouraging real authentic mentorship, starting with the professional pipeline. Whenever my mentors taught me, when you get promoted, I just recently got a promotion, there should be 3 people behind you that can move up 1 or 2 slots. And that's the sign of success. Do I lift as I climb? Am I mentoring advancing staff that can follow with me upward? Microaggression and anti-bias, using the recognition of our own internal bias and possible activities that could be microaggressive, to being an anti-racist. Being anti-racist means I identify the blind spots that I have, and I deprogram them in myself and advocate for those type of changes every day. So these are some topics that we may be talking about here at the Miller Business Library, or that you can pursue with your organization. Next slide. And finally, here are some really great links. The Danger of a Single Story, Chimamanda Adichie, fantastic TED Talk about the danger of a single story, differentiating between equity and equality. And then Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, the author and creator and architect of the term intersectionality and its whole import and impact on organizational behavior. Intersectionality, Diversity Beyond Lip Service, another great book. And then Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People. And I'm reading a book right now called Unbiased, Addressing Unconscious Bias at Work, and another one called Inclusify, another good book about creating a more safe and inclusive environment at work. Next slide, please. So upcoming workshop is next Tuesday, the 18th. Next Tuesday, the 18th. That is correct. What's next? Coffee and Connect. And we're going to talk about where we go from here. What are the next steps? What can we talk about from this point on? How can we put this all together? We have already covered expert grant writing, also expert fundraising. Now we're talking about DEI for nonprofits. And now we're going to put all that together. And next week will be an opportunity to sit down, cup of coffee, and kind of go over some things and ask questions and move forward with an action plan. Final and last slide. Next up, please. So I'm always available. Elizabeth knows how to get in touch with me. But more importantly, I have a monthly newsletter called The Daily Act. If you want to join, email me and I'll add you to the list. NicoleJeanChristian@gmail.com. Monthly or bi-monthly, I always try to share something interesting about a newer topic in this field, not just DEI, but DEI and organizational behavior in general. Thank you so much. We perfect time. I said I was going to end at 10:40 so that we could have about 15, 20 minutes of questions and comments. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth now. Thank you.